The universe was silent when the signal came. It was not a normal transmission or a random noise. It was a cry full of pain and fear. The message repeated again and again in broken words, carrying a meaning that anyone could understand even without translation. It was a desperate call for help. Somewhere far away from Earth, an entire alien race was dying. Their voices trembled with terror as they begged anyone who could hear them, to save them from an empire that was crushing everything they loved. On Earth, the signal first appeared as a faint pattern of numbers. Scientists at an observatory in South America thought it was interference, but when the pattern repeated every 6 hours, they realized it was intelligent. The language was complex, but hidden inside the transmission were coordinates, directions pointing toward a distant part of the galaxy. The discovery spread like fire across every space agency, military base, and research center. Humanity had always dreamed of meeting other life forms, but no one imagined the first contact would come like this, drenched in fear and hopelessness. Governments held emergency meetings. Some believed it was a trap. Others said it was destiny. But the group that reacted fastest was not the politicians. It was the explorers and soldiers who had lived and fought in the most dangerous corners of the universe. They were called Deathworlders, a name given by alien species who had already met humans in the outer colonies. The name came from Earth itself, a planet full of danger, storms, and predators. Life on Earth had made humans strong, adaptable, and frighteningly determined. When other species gave up, humans kept fighting. When others froze in fear, humans took action. That was the Deathworlder spirit. When the news of the SOS spread, these men and women didn't wait for orders. They understood the voice behind that cry. They knew what it meant to be desperate, to stand on the edge of extinction and to still hope for rescue. Military units began preparing silently. Ships were fueled, weapons calibrated, and supply chains arranged. Engineers worked without rest, upgrading old warships that hadn't flown for decades. Spaceports buzzed with activity as crews volunteered for a mission that had no promise of return. Among them was Commander Elias Rain, a soldier who had survived more wars than most people could imagine. He listened to the transmission in the control room, eyes hard but heart heavy. The sound of that broken alien voice reminded him of the time when his own city had been under siege back on Earth. He remembered what it felt like to wait for help that never came. That memory made the decision for him. He turned to his officers and said, "If they're calling for help, we're going." Those few words spread like a spark through every ship and every heart that heard them. The human fleet that assembled was small compared to the great empires of the stars, but each ship carried warriors forged by a world that never forgave weakness. They were miners from Mars who had fought vacuum leaks with bare hands, engineers from lunar bases who had survived explosions, soldiers who had battled in alien jungles and lived through radiation storms. They were used to pain, used to fear, and they carried both with pride. As they prepared to leave, news broke across Earth's media. Some people cheered humanity's bravery, others called it madness. There were protests, warnings, and debates, but the Deathworlders didn't care. They had already chosen their path. For them, this wasn't about politics, it was about a simple truth. When someone cries for help, you answer. Humanity had once been alone and weak, but they had grown strong not by ignoring others' pain, but by standing together. That spirit was what made them human. The day the fleet launched, millions watched from Earth and its colonies. The ships rose silently through the clouds, their metal hulls reflecting sunlight like silver blades. Children waved from observation domes. Old veterans saluted. Every person watching felt the same strange feeling, a mix of pride and fear. No one knew what waited for them out there, but they believed in the ones who were going. The journey took weeks. The coordinates led the fleet far beyond known space into a dark region filled with dust clouds and dying stars. The deeper they went, the quieter the universe seemed. The transmissions grew weaker, filled with static and broken fragments. Then suddenly the message stopped. For hours there was nothing. No signal, no noise, only silence. Some began to fear they were too late. Then the sensors picked up something faint, a drifting object. As they approached, they saw what it was. A wrecked ship, alien in design, torn apart by weapon fire. Inside they found the remains of a crew, bodies floating in zero gravity, frozen expressions of horror on their faces. The ship's walls were burned with strange markings, the symbol of the Krail Dominion. Humanity had heard rumors of the Krail before, a ruthless empire that ruled through fear, conquering weaker races, destroying planets that resisted. But seeing their work up close was different. The Deathworlders felt rage rising in their chests. This was no ordinary enemy. This was evil that had grown too comfortable. They followed the trail of destruction. One planet after another they found the same story: ruins, ashes, silence. But on one dying moon they found survivors. The aliens were thin, fragile creatures with transparent skin and wide, glowing eyes. They trembled at the sight of the humans, expecting death. To them, the Deathworlders looked like monsters, tall, armored, scarred, and carrying weapons that hummed with power. But when the humans offered food, wrapped them in thermal blankets, and repaired their life support systems, the fear slowly faded. The aliens spoke through translators, their voices soft and broken. They said their world had been destroyed, their people enslaved, their families killed. The SOS was their last hope. They had sent it not expecting anyone to come. One of the survivors asked, "Why did you come? You don't even know us." Commander Rain looked at the creature and said simply, "Because someone has to." That answer spread among the survivors like warmth. For the first time in years, they felt hope. As the Deathworlders gathered the refugees and repaired their ships, they received one more signal, a warning. The Krail Dominion had detected the human presence. Their fleets were on the move. The humans didn't retreat. They stood firm, knowing what was coming. Every soldier knew the risk, but no one complained. They had already seen what the Krail did to those who couldn't fight. And for the first time, the monsters of the galaxy were about to face the monsters of Earth. When the engines of the human fleet roared to life again, the stars themselves seemed to tremble. They were not going as explorers or diplomats now. They were going as protectors, as avengers. The Deathworlders had answered the call, and nothing in the universe could make them turn back. The SOS had reached the one species that never ignored a cry for help, and the universe was about to learn what that truly meant. When the human fleet finally reached the edge of the Krail Empire's territory, the sight before them was unlike anything they had ever seen. Whole planets were burning. Broken pieces of space stations floated in silence. Clouds of ash drifted between shattered moons. It was as if an entire region of the galaxy had been swallowed by death itself. The humans watched from their ships, stunned by the destruction. Even the most hardened Deathworlders, who had seen war and chaos all their lives, felt their hearts grow heavy. This was not just war. It was complete extermination. Commander Elias Rain stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Resolute Dawn, staring at the holographic map of the system. Every colony, every signal, every beacon was gone. Only faint traces of life remained on the outskirts. "Search for survivors," he ordered quietly. The crew obeyed without hesitation, sending out drones and scouts to scan every fragment of wreckage. Hours passed before one of the smaller ships, Vanguard 3, reported movement, weak energy readings coming from a half-destroyed freighter drifting near a dead moon. The Deathworlders boarded the wreck cautiously. Inside it was dark and cold. Fires had burned through most of the corridors, and the air smelled of melted metal and death. But deep inside the ship, sealed behind broken doors, they found a group of survivors. Aliens with delicate skin, thin limbs, and frightened eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. They were huddled together, shivering, expecting the humans to finish what the Krail had started. The first human to approach them was Sergeant Lena Morick, a medic who had once served in disaster zones back on Earth. She slowly removed her helmet, showing her face, and knelt in front of them. "We're not here to hurt you," she said softly. The translator device repeated her words in a trembling alien voice. The survivors looked at one another, unsure whether to believe her. When she offered them water and emergency food packs, one of the aliens reached out with shaking hands and accepted. The others followed, still afraid but too weak to resist kindness. Back on the ship, the medics worked tirelessly to save the wounded. The aliens' bodies were fragile, their lungs barely able to breathe human air, so the engineers built special chambers filled with the gases they needed. The Deathworlders handled them gently, speaking in calm tones even as they worked in silence. For the first time since the SOS was sent, the aliens saw something they thought no longer existed: hope. Through translation software, they began to tell their story. Their species was called the Alari, a peaceful civilization known for art and science. They had never built weapons. They had never fought wars. When the Krail Empire invaded, they had tried to negotiate, but the Krail saw their kindness as weakness. They destroyed the Alari's defenses in days, enslaved their population, and burned entire cities to set an example. The survivors who sent the SOS had escaped only by chance, hiding inside an old cargo freighter while their homeworld burned behind them. When Commander Rain heard their story, his jaw tightened. He had fought many battles before, but this one felt different. This was not just about survival, it was about justice. They thought no one would come for you, he said quietly. They were wrong. The Alari didn't fully understand the meaning of those words, but they could feel the emotion behind them, the human promise to protect. Days later, more survivors were found. A few damaged ships drifted in nearby space, filled with refugees barely alive. The human fleet brought them aboard, offering medical help, food, and shelter. But not all aliens greeted them with gratitude. Some were terrified. To them, humans looked like demons, tall, muscular, covered in armor, with faces hidden behind helmets and voices that sounded harsh through the translators. The stories they had heard about Deathworlders painted humans as monsters who thrived on chaos. The idea that such beings would come to save them was impossible to believe. That fear slowly began to fade when they saw how the humans treated their children. The soldiers who had faced countless wars became gentle caretakers. They shared rations, repaired broken toys, and built small shelters inside cargo bays. Even the toughest Marines smiled when a small alien child reached out to touch their gloved hands. The aliens began to whisper among themselves, calling the humans the fire that protects, a phrase from their own language that meant warriors who burn to save others. But peace didn't last long. One night, while the fleet was orbiting a ruined planet, alarms blared across the ships. Unknown signals appeared on the radar, small, fast-moving crafts heading straight toward them. The Krail had found them. The Deathworlders reacted instantly. Pilots rushed to their fighters, soldiers armed themselves, and the bridge came alive with commands. Commander Rain gave a single order. No one touches the refugees. The Krail ships attacked with brutal efficiency. They fired plasma bursts that ripped through the empty space, lighting up the void with explosions. The humans fought back with precision and fury. Missiles streaked from the launch bays, guided by human hands that had spent decades mastering the art of survival. The battle was quick but fierce. The Deathworlders fought like the world they came from, aggressive, adaptable, relentless. Within minutes, the Krail raiders were destroyed. After the battle, the aliens stared at their human saviors with new eyes. They had just witnessed something they had never seen before, a species that could fight with terrifying strength yet still show mercy. One of the Alari elders said in awe, "You are creatures of violence, but your hearts are made of light." The humans didn't know how to respond. They had not come for praise. They had come because it was the right thing to do. Over the next days, the Deathworlders began rebuilding what they could. Engineers repaired damaged alien ships, teaching the survivors how to maintain engines and shields. Medical teams taught them how to purify water and grow food in space. Humanity didn't just fight for them, they helped them stand again. For the Alari, this was something new. The Krail had taught them only fear. The humans were teaching them strength. In the evenings, when the fleet entered quiet zones, the aliens would gather to sing songs of mourning for their lost world. The humans would listen silently, their hearts heavy with respect. One night, an alien child approached a group of soldiers sitting by the viewport and offered them a small crystal that glowed faintly. "For your courage," the translator said. Sergeant Lena took it carefully and smiled. "Keep it," she said. "You'll need it more than we do." The child shook their head. "We already have you," they said softly. Every person aboard those ships could feel it, the connection forming between two very different kinds of life. Humanity had always been seen as dangerous, unpredictable, even savage by other species. But now, for the first time, someone was seeing the truth beneath the rough surface. The Deathworlders were not dangerous because they loved destruction. They were dangerous because they refused to give up on life, any life. As the fleet moved deeper into Krail space, they continued to rescue survivors. Each time the aliens' fear grew less, word began to spread across the occupied systems. The Deathworlders had come. To the enslaved races, the name became a whisper of hope. To the Krail, it became a warning. Commander Rain knew that bigger battles were coming. The enemy wouldn't ignore them for long, but as he watched the stars ahead filled with hidden dangers, he felt something powerful rising in his chest. For the first time in his career, he wasn't fighting for Earth or any flag. He was fighting for something larger, an idea that humanity had carried from its first days of struggle. No one deserves to be alone in the dark. The fleet sailed on, engines burning like stars against the void. Behind them floated the saved remnants of a civilization once thought lost. Ahead of them lay the heart of the enemy empire. The Deathworlders didn't know how many of them would live to see the end, but it didn't matter. They had already made history. The day they answered that SOS, the universe changed. And now, every alien eye that looked to the sky did so with a new feeling in their hearts. Hope, carried by the fire of humanity. The peace after the rescue did not last long. The Krail Empire had noticed the sudden interference in their conquered territories. Reports of human ships helping refugees and destroying Krail patrols began to reach their command centers. The Empire, proud and merciless, could not accept such defiance. The Emperor of the Krail, sitting on his throne made of black crystal, ordered a message to be sent across his fleets. Find the Deathworlders. Crush them. Leave nothing alive. The humans didn't need to wait long. The first real battle began at the border of the Eric system, where the human fleet was guiding hundreds of rescued ships to safety. When the alarms went off, the stars outside suddenly filled with movement. Hundreds of Krail warships appeared, forming a dark wall of metal and energy. Their ships were massive, shaped like claws and teeth glowing with red lights. The sheer size of the fleet made even the bravest soldiers fall silent for a moment. Commander Elias Rain stood on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, staring at the enemy formation. His second-in-command whispered, "They outnumber us 10-1. Rain didn't look away. "Then we'll just have to kill each one 10 times faster," he replied. His words made the crew smile nervously, but deep down, they felt that same fierce fire humans carried through every storm. The Krail sent a transmission before attacking. The voice that came through was cold and filled with arrogance. "Deathworlders," it said, "you dare interfere with the empire of Krail? You are nothing but animals. Surrender your ships and we might let your species live as slaves." The room went silent. Rain leaned forward and answered in a calm voice, "We're not here to surrender. We're here to end you." Then he cut the transmission. The first attack came like a thunderstorm. Energy beams tore through the blackness of space, hitting the shields of the human fleet. The ships shook violently, alarms blaring everywhere. But the Deathworlders didn't panic. They had fought in worse conditions on burning worlds, inside collapsing mines, under alien bombardment. To them, space was just another battlefield. "Return fire," Rain ordered. The human ships responded with precision. Missile trails lit up the darkness like comets, slamming into the Krail front lines. Plasma cannons roared from destroyers, cutting through enemy armor. Human fighters moved like living arrows, weaving through explosions, targeting weak spots. Unlike the Krail, whose war tactics were rigid and cold, the Deathworlders fought with instinct and creativity. One ship, the Iron Claw, had its main weapons destroyed early in the battle. Instead of retreating, its captain ordered the crew to ram into the nearest Krail cruiser. The collision caused a massive explosion, destroying both ships, but the sacrifice opened a hole in the enemy formation. Other human ships rushed in, firing through the gap. The Krail commanders were confused. They had fought countless species before, but none behaved like this. When faced with overwhelming firepower, most would surrender or flee. Humans did neither. They adapted, turning disaster into advantage, chaos into strategy. When their ships took damage, they repaired them mid-battle. When their communications broke down, they used light signals and hand gestures across viewports. The Krail's greatest strength, discipline, and control became their weakness against human unpredictability. In the middle of the battle, the Alari refugees watched from the safety of the rear ships. Their eyes were wide with shock and awe. The Deathworlders fought like demons, but there was beauty in their madness. Each human ship seemed alive, moving with emotion and purpose. To the Alari, who had never fought before, it was impossible to understand how creatures born from such a dangerous planet could carry such courage. But victory didn't come easily. The Krail Empire had weapons the humans had never seen before. Plasma storms that could tear through shields and energy mines that tracked heat signatures. Many human ships were destroyed. The Silver Wind was hit directly and broke apart, its crew evacuating into the void. The Resolute Dawn took several hits too, shaking violently as systems failed. "Engine 3 down," a crew member shouted. Sparks flew from the consoles. Commander Rain held onto the railing, refusing to show fear. "Reroute power from life support to the weapons," he ordered. "But sir—" "Do it!" he barked. The lights dimmed as oxygen levels dropped, but the ship's main cannons glowed brighter than ever. They fired a full barrage, tearing a Krail battleship in half. Inside the fighter bays, pilots were running low on ammunition. One of them, Lieutenant Tessa Vorn, had already lost half her squadron. She flew through debris, dodging plasma fire, her fighter's hull glowing red-hot. "I'm out of missiles," she yelled. "Then use the ship," came the calm reply from her commander. She didn't hesitate. She accelerated straight into an enemy cruiser's engine core, exploding on impact. Her sacrifice destroyed the ship and saved hundreds of lives. The fleet would remember her name forever. As the hours passed, space around them became a graveyard of burning wrecks. Both sides suffered heavy losses, but the Krail began to falter. They had underestimated the humans' willpower. Even when outnumbered, the Deathworlders refused to break. Every time a ship went down, another one took its place, fighting harder. Then came the moment that turned the battle. The Krail flagship, Dominion's Wrath, was advancing toward the refugee convoy. It was the largest ship anyone had ever seen. Its main cannon could destroy a planet. The Ilari cried out in fear as its shadow fell over them. Commander Rain saw it too. If that ship fired, everything would be over. He opened a communication channel to the fleet. "All ships form on me. We're taking that monster down." The Resolute Dawn led the charge. Smaller ships followed, weaving between enemy fire. Explosions surrounded them, but they didn't stop. The Krail flagship targeted them, charging its main weapon. The humans had one chance. Rain ordered the fleet to focus all fire on the weapon core. Missiles, lasers, and plasma struck the same spot repeatedly. The enemy shields flickered, then collapsed. At that moment, the Resolute Dawn was too close to turn back. Rain looked at the screen showing the massive cannon glowing brighter and brighter. "All power to forward shields," he shouted. The human ship flew straight through the storm, its hull burning. Just as the Krail cannon fired, the humans unleashed their last missile barrage directly into its mouth. The explosion that followed was like a star being born. The shockwave tore through space, knocking ships in every direction. For several seconds, nothing could be seen but light. When it faded, the Dominion's Wrath was gone, split into 1,000 pieces, drifting silently. The Krail fleet broke. Their commanders, stunned by the loss, began to retreat. The Deathworlders had done the impossible. They had defeated the Empire's most powerful force. The surviving humans cheered weakly over the radio, their voices tired but proud. When the battle was over, silence filled the bridge. Commander Rain looked around at his exhausted crew. Many were wounded, some were dead, but all were still standing. "We hold this ground," he said quietly. "For every life they took, for every world they burned." The refugees wept when they heard the news. They had been saved by a species they once feared. The Ilari elder bowed deeply before the commander. "We thought you were monsters," she said softly. "Now we know you are our guardians." But Rain didn't smile. He looked out at the wreckage scattered across the stars. The cost had been terrible. Thousands of humans were gone, ships reduced to ashes, and he knew this was only the beginning. The Krail would not stop after one defeat. The real war was coming. Still, something had changed forever. The message spread through every surviving ship and every freed world. The Deathworlders had stood against the Krail and survived. For the first time in generations, the galaxy had hope. And in the darkness of space, where once there had only been silence and fear, the fire of humanity now burned brighter than ever. The war dragged on for weeks after the great victory at the Erix system. The Krail Empire was wounded but not destroyed. Their pride had been shattered, but their power was far from gone. They had lost one fleet, yet hundreds more waited in the shadows of their home systems. The Deathworlders knew that the Krail would not forgive, and they would not forget. Humanity had challenged an empire that had ruled the galaxy through fear for centuries. Now the full strength of that empire was coming for them. The human fleet continued to move deeper into enemy territory, helping enslaved worlds rise up and freeing thousands of prisoners. Everywhere they went, they saw destruction. Cities turned to ash, oceans poisoned, and skies filled with smoke. The humans gave food to the starving. medicine to the sick and weapons to those who wanted to fight back. But with each act of mercy, they grew weaker. Supplies were running low, and their ships were taking damage that could not always be repaired. Commander Elias Rain knew they could not fight forever. Then came the darkest news of all. Through intercepted transmissions, the humans learned that the Krail had activated something called the Eclipse Engine. It was a weapon so powerful that even the Krail feared to use it. It could destroy an entire star, wiping out every planet in its system. The Krail planned to use it on the freed worlds, to send a message to all who resisted. Hope would not be allowed to live. When Commander Rain received the data, he stood in silence, staring at the glowing image of the weapon projected before him. It was massive, a fortress built inside an artificial moon. He knew what it meant. If the Krail succeeded, everything they had fought for would be gone. The newly freed species would be exterminated, and humanity's name would be erased from history. There was only one choice. They had to stop the weapon no matter the cost. The fleet gathered what little strength it had left. Engineers worked through sleepless nights, patching holes in ships, recharging weapons with scavenged parts. Soldiers who had lost friends in previous battles volunteered for the mission without hesitation. They all knew it could be their last fight. Even the Alari survivors insisted on helping, offering knowledge of Krail communication systems and supply routes. Everyone understood that this battle would decide everything. As the fleet approached the system where the Eclipse Engine was hidden, the space around them shimmered with energy. The Krail had surrounded the weapon with an enormous defensive fleet. Their ships blocked every path. The humans were outnumbered 20-1. Commander Rain looked at his officers and said, "We can't outgun them, so we'll outthink them." He explained a plan so risky that even his crew hesitated. A small team would infiltrate the weapon directly, while the fleet created a distraction. The goal was not to win the battle, but to destroy the weapon before it fired. The infiltration team was made up of 20 of the best Deathworlder Marines, led by Captain Lena Morick, the same medic who had saved the Alari refugees. She volunteered without being asked. "Someone has to go," she said. "I'd rather it be me." The rest of the Marines nodded silently. They knew what it meant. They were not coming back. The day of the assault arrived. The fleet jumped into the system and instantly chaos filled the stars. The Krail forces opened fire with everything they had. The sky turned into a storm of light and explosions. Human ships moved like ghosts through the chaos, dodging and weaving, using asteroids as cover. Commander Rain gave the order. "Launch the infiltration team." A small stealth ship broke from formation and sped toward the artificial moon. Hidden behind the noise of battle, it slipped past the Krail defenses and landed near the weapon's surface. The Marines cut through the outer hull and entered the maze of tunnels inside. The interior of the weapon was alive with machines, massive conduits of energy pulsating like veins of a monster's heart. The Marines moved carefully, fighting off automated drones and enemy guards. Every corner held danger. Every step brought them closer to the core. They could feel the vibrations through their boots as the weapon powered up. If it fired, millions of lives would vanish in seconds. They had minutes at best. Meanwhile, outside, the human fleet was being torn apart. The Krail had unleashed wave after wave of attacks. Dozens of human ships were gone, reduced to glowing wrecks. The Resolute Dawn took heavy damage. Half its engines were destroyed, and its shield generator was barely holding. Commander Rain stood amidst smoke and alarm, shouting orders as explosions shook the bridge. "Keep firing! Don't let them through!" he commanded. They were losing ships, but every minute they held the line gave the infiltration team a little more time. Inside the weapon, Captain Lena and her team reached the core chamber. It was a vast open space filled with swirling energy that looked like a captured sun. Around it, enormous reactors pulsed with unbearable light. "We found it," Lena said into her communicator. "There's no way to shut it down safely. We'll have to overload it manually." She looked at her soldiers, all tired, all wounded, but none willing to turn back. "You know what that means," she said. One of them smiled weakly. "Yeah, let's make it count." They began placing explosives around the reactors, working quickly while Krail soldiers closed in from all sides. Gunfire echoed through the chamber, lighting up the metal walls. One by one, the Marines fell, covering their teammates so the mission could continue. Back in space, Commander Rain received their final message. "Charges set." Lena's voice came through, filled with static. "Tell them, Tell them we finished what we started. Rain clenched his fists. You did more than that, Captain, he whispered. You saved us all. Moments later, the transmission went silent. Then, suddenly, the weapon's core began to glow brighter and brighter. The Krail realized too late what was happening. They tried to shut it down, but the overload spread faster than their systems could respond. From the Resolute Dawn, Rain and his crew watched in awe as the artificial moon cracked apart, light spilling from its surface like liquid fire. The explosion that followed was like nothing anyone had ever seen. A wave of light and heat expanded outward, consuming everything nearby. The Krail fleet, the moon, the weapon itself. Human ships at the edge of the blast were thrown hundreds of kilometers away, their systems shutting down from the shock. For a moment, the universe was pure white. When the light faded, the Eclipse engine was gone. So was the infiltration team. The space where the weapon had been was now filled with glowing debris, slowly drifting apart. The human fleet had survived, but barely. Half of their ships were gone and countless soldiers had died. Yet they had done it. The galaxy's greatest weapon had been destroyed. On the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, the crew sat in stunned silence. Some cried quietly. Others stared out at the remains of the weapon, whispering prayers for their fallen comrades. Commander Rain stood at the viewport, the faint light of the explosion reflecting in his eyes. They did it, he said softly. They gave us the future. The Alari refugees, listening from their ships, began to sing an ancient song, a song of rebirth. Their voices carried through the communication channels, echoing through every ship in the fleet. Even the battle-hardened Deathworlders felt tears in their eyes as they listened. But victory felt heavy. The cost was too great. The Marines who had gone inside would never return. Many others had died holding the line. Space was filled with wreckage and silence. Still, in that silence, there was peace, the kind that comes only after great sacrifice. As the fleet began to regroup, Commander Rain sent a message to all allied worlds. It was short, simple, and powerful. The weapon is gone. The Krail can bleed. The Deathworlders stand. That message spread across the galaxy faster than any signal before it. On countless worlds, slaves rose up, rebels took to the streets, and the once fearful species began to fight back. The legend of the Deathworlders grew into something greater than anyone could have imagined. For humanity, it was the darkest and brightest moment at once. They had faced the edge of extinction and refused to step back. They had sacrificed their bravest to protect those they barely knew. And though the stars around them were filled with wreckage, they glowed brighter that night, as if the universe itself was bowing its head in respect to those who had given everything. The Deathworlders had done what no one else could. They had turned despair into hope. The story of their courage would travel across generations, told by the children of those they saved. And somewhere deep in the quiet void, the spirits of Captain Lena and her Marines would rest, knowing that their fight had not been in vain. Weeks passed after the destruction of the Eclipse engine, but the fire of war still burned across the galaxy. The Krail Empire, once seen as unstoppable, had been shaken to its core. Their fleets were scattered, their supply lines were broken, and their rule of fear was crumbling. Yet they were not finished. Like a wounded predator, the Krail became more dangerous than ever, lashing out at anyone who defied them. The Deathworlders knew that the real war was not over. It was only changing its face. The human fleet drifted through the ruins of what was once a Krail stronghold. Broken ships floated silently in the dark, and the bodies of warriors, both human and alien, drifted among the stars. Commander Elias Rain stood on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, looking out into the endless void. His heart felt heavy. They had won a great battle, but the cost was unbearable. Every victory had come with pain. Every step forward had demanded a sacrifice. He remembered Captain Lena and her team, the brave souls who had given their lives to destroy the weapon. Their names were now written in the ship's memorial hall, glowing softly in the light of candles that never went out. Messages of hope began to spread through the galaxy. The freed species sent transmissions of gratitude to the Deathworlders. The Ellery, now rebuilding their shattered cities, sent food and supplies as gifts. Even species that had once feared humanity started to reach out, asking to join their alliance. The humans had become a symbol of defiance, a small, fierce people who had stood against an empire and won. But Commander Rain knew that symbols alone could not win a war. They needed strategy, unity and time was something they didn't have. The Krail Empire had retreated to its inner systems, gathering its remaining strength. Reports came in of a new supreme commander, Lord Vekar, taking control of the empire. Unlike his predecessors, Vekar was not driven by pride or tradition. He was cold, calculating, and patient. His first message to the galaxy was clear: the Deathworlders will burn. When Rain received that message, he played it before his crew. The holographic image of Vekar's face glared down at them, his voice full of hatred. "You think you have won," he said. "You think your courage makes you strong? But strength is nothing against eternity. The Krail were here before you, and we will be here long after your ashes drift through the void." Then the transmission ended, leaving only silence. For a moment the bridge was quiet. Then one of the younger officers, still covered in bandages from the last battle, stood up and said softly, "Then we'll make sure our ashes choke them." The crew smiled, tired, but defiant. That was the spirit that kept them alive, the fire that never went out. Soon the fleet received a signal from a world called Tethera 9, deep inside Krail space. It was a planet filled with slaves from dozens of species, all rebelling against their masters. The Krail had sent fleets to crush them, and their leaders begged for help. The humans knew it was a trap. The Krail wanted to lure them in, to destroy what remained of their fleet. But Rain looked at the transmission of terrified faces, the same kind of faces they had seen when the first SOS arrived from the Alari homeworld, and he knew what they had to do. "Set course for Tethera 9, he said. "If it's a trap, we'll spring it. If it's not, we'll save them." The fleet jumped into the system, ready for anything. The moment they arrived, alarms blared. The Krail fleet was already waiting, hundreds of warships shining with deadly energy. It was a sea of death. But in the distance, the surface of Tethera 9 burned. Cities were being bombed, and people were running for their lives. Rain gave the order. "All ships protect the planet. Focus fire on the command ships. Let's show them what Deathworlders can do." The sky above Tethera 9 became a storm of light. Human ships fought like demons, weaving through enemy fire, hitting hard and fast. The Krail commanders couldn't understand how these humans kept fighting, even when outnumbered. Every time a human ship fell, another one pushed forward to take its place. It wasn't discipline or strategy alone, it was heart. The Deathworlders were fighting for something the Krail could never understand: hope. On the ground, human marines landed amidst chaos. They found entire cities under siege, but the rebels had not given up. An Alari fighter named Sira led the resistance. Her voice broadcast across the planet, urging her people to fight on. When she saw the humans descending from the sky, she wept with relief. "They came," she whispered. The Deathworlders came. The battle on the ground was brutal. Streets burned, air was thick with smoke, and the sound of explosions echoed through the valleys. The Krail soldiers were ruthless, but the humans matched them blow for blow. They fought side by side with the rebels, Ilari, Drake, and even former Krail slaves who had turned against their masters. In one city square, a human soldier raised the Earth flag next to the banners of a dozen other species. For the first time, those different people fought as one army, not as separate races. Commander Rain coordinated the fight from orbit, moving ships like chess pieces. But as the hours passed, it became clear that they were outmatched. The Krail fleet kept coming, pouring in reinforcements from every side. Rain knew they couldn't win by staying. Then he saw a pattern in the Krail formation, a weak point near their fuel ships. If they destroyed those, the enemy's entire fleet would be crippled. He ordered a group of ships, including his own, to make a direct assault. "All power to engines," he commanded. "Let's finish this." The resolute Dawn charged forward, weapons blazing, shields burning under the enemy fire. The crew held their breath as they dived straight into the heart of the Krail armada. Missiles exploded all around them, but they didn't stop. When they reached the fuel ships, they fired everything they had. The explosions that followed ripped through the Krail lines like a storm, tearing apart ship after ship. The Deathworlders had done it again. They had turned certain defeat into victory. The Krail fleet began to retreat, their ships burning as they fled. The rebels on the ground cheered, and across the galaxy, millions of people watched the broadcast of the battle. For the first time in history, the Krail Empire had been pushed back from its own territory. But victory came with a heavy cost. Many of the human ships were gone, and the resolute Dawn was barely holding together. Fires burned across its decks and hundreds of crew members were injured or missing. Commander Rain himself was wounded, but he refused to leave the bridge. He looked out at the stars and said softly, "We've done enough for today." After the battle, Tethera 9 became a symbol of unity. The freed species gathered to form a new alliance, not built on fear or conquest but on mutual defense and respect. They called it the Concord of the Free Worlds. Humanity was offered a seat at its head. Rain accepted, not as a conqueror but as a guardian. "We are Deathworlders," he told them, "but we don't fight for death. We fight for life." As the months passed, the Krail Empire continued to crumble. One by one, their worlds rebelled. Lord Vakar disappeared, either killed or hiding. The galaxy, long ruled by fear, began to heal. And though the Deathworlders had suffered greatly, they had earned something far greater than victory. They had earned trust. Years later, stories of the Deathworlders spread like legends. Children across alien worlds played games pretending to be brave humans from Earth. Songs were written about Captain Lena's sacrifice, about the Eclipse engine, and about the battle for Tethera 9. Humanity had become more than a species. They had become a symbol of resistance, courage, and hope. Commander Rain, now old and tired, often sat by the observation window of his ship, looking out at the stars. He thought of all the lives lost, all the friends who never came back. Yet he also thought of the laughter of children, the rebuilding of cities, and the peace that now stretched across the stars. One evening, as the twin suns of Tethera 9 set, he whispered to himself, "We answered the call, and we didn't just survive, we changed everything." Far away in a quiet corner of the galaxy, a monument stood, a massive structure built from the wreckage of the Resolute Dawn. At its center burned an eternal flame, surrounded by the names of every Deathworlder who had fallen in the war. Carved beneath those names were 4 simple words that every traveler stopped to read. They came when we called. And so the legend of the Deathworlders lived on, not just as warriors, but as saviors. They had answered the SOS of a dying galaxy and turned despair into hope. The empire that once ruled with terror was gone, and in its place countless worlds now stood free. The story would be told again and again across the stars, how when the weak cried out for help, humanity heard them, and the Deathworlders came.